Hello and a warm welcome from sunny Brussels to today's webinar. I'm Raffaele Rossi and I'm policy analyst at SolarPower Europe, and I'm here today with my colleague Michael Schmela, who is the executive advisor and head of market intelligence at SolarPower Europe, to present our new report, the EU Market Outlook for Solar Power 2019-2023. The new study has been launched just 2 days ago and has been presented for the first time by our CEO Walburga Hemetsberger during COP25 in Madrid. Following the publication of our award-winning Global Market Outlook for Solar Power 2019, this EU Market Outlook 2019 gives a closer look at solar in the European Union and explores the status of the leading solar markets across the bloc. So for our first EU Market Outlook, we are very glad to be getting such media coverage and good response from stakeholders. The timing of this publication is actually not casual because we have a new European Commission and a recently installed new European Parliament, and President von der Leyen launched the EU Green Deal just yesterday. Therefore, we wanted to convey a very timely message to European policymakers and stakeholders about the status of solar today in Europe. Before we start, let me highlight the few housekeeping rules that we always have. So first of all, slides and the recording of the webinar will be available shortly after the end of the webinar, and they will be sent directly to your inbox. Second, if you have any questions, you can type them using the tool on the right-hand side of the screen. Please remember to do it in the questions box and not in the chat box, as you can see from the slide here. We will try to address your questions during the Q&A session that will take place after the presentation. And just a remark, please write your questions early so that we can try to cluster them and address them in a meaningful order. So that's all from my side. We can now start with the presentation. So I leave the floor to Michael to illustrate the key takeaways from our new study. And I wish you all a good webinar. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Raffaele. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, that's really great to have you here. It's really for us to say time has come to look at solar PV in the European Union now much more thoroughly. As Raffaele said, SolarPower Europe has been publishing a global market outlook for many years. I think it's over a decade, and Europe has been just one part of this comprehensive annual overview of developments in the solar sector worldwide. And in particular, in recent years, this solar demand has mostly taken place in Asia. That's different now in 2019. Solar has been growing over 100%. And the European Union, and that we will show then in our global market outlook, has outpaced actually most of the leading global solar regions this year. What we will also see is that in addition, more new capacity was installed for solar in the European Union than for any other power generation technology. That goes for renewables and for fossil fuels and nuclear. So it's really an important and extraordinary year for solar. So as Raffaele said, this first European market outlook will provide details on what we expect to be really a prelude of a European solar renaissance for the coming decade and beyond, as we believe. And it is addressed primarily at policymakers in the EU, and we have many new of them. We have a new administration, we have a new parliament. We really want to help them with this document better understand the huge opportunities solar offers. So I would really like to take this opportunity to say a big thank you to everyone who contributed, and that goes in particular to our national association members. So very briefly on SolarPower Europe, next slide please. Who we are. SolarPower Europe is the Solar Sector Association. We represent over 200 organizations. I think to be specific, it's now 230 from the entire solar value chain. And we have basically two main jobs. One is to help shape the policy environment, and the other one is to make business happen in the solar industry. Next slide. As you can see from this slide, we are covering the whole value chain. We start from raw materials and go very much downstream. And we also cover neighboring sectors such as storage, EV, charging infrastructure. With the demand growing now so quickly in Europe, we are also seeing many big developers and utilities joining us. So I think we cover now basically most of the big utilities. The last one to join us very recently was Vattenfall from Sweden. We also have now Austrian utility Verbund, which also joined us. So as you can see, our membership is very broad. But that's just for the intro, in case you didn't know us. Next slide, please. Okay, as you can see, 2019 was really one of the best years for solar in the European Union. The region installed 16.7 gigawatts. That's a 104% increase over the 8.2 gigawatt that we added in Europe the year before. In fact, as you can see from this slide, it's the strongest solar growth year in the EU since 2010, and that was the time when the PV market, that was the first solar growth phase in Europe, when the PV market grew exactly also 104%. But that was a lower level at that time, and from 2009 to 2010. And it reached 13.4 gigawatt at that time. What's also interesting is that this 16.7 gigawatt, let's see if this will be the final number, because obviously 2019 is not yet over, and so we had to extrapolate. That's what we did from basically the first 3 quarters. And but in any case, so I think the 16.7 gigawatt is very close to the 17.1 gigawatt that we forecasted in our global market outlook that we released in May. Next slide, please. Here you can see the top 10 markets, what they installed in 2019 in comparison to 2018. And what's interesting, so while the EU's current solar decade, if you really look back the last 10 years, has been mostly dominated by Germany. It had to give up the top spots for 3 years to the UK a few years ago. There's now a new member state in the top position. Spain was by far the largest solar market in 2019. What is important to say is that if you look at the top 5 markets, you see, especially it's maybe the top 3 markets, they are much bigger than the others. The top 5 alone actually account for almost 3/4 of all installations. And if you look at the top 10 markets, then they account for over 93% of total installations. But nevertheless, I think it's important to say here that although the European growth was dependent on just a few markets, the good news is that from the 28 member states, actually, 26 members installed more solar than the year before. Next slide, please. And here you can already see that trend. While in 2019 it was really four countries that were larger than a gigawatt market, than a gigawatt scale. In 2018 that was only 2, and in 2017, so that means 2 years ago, It was only one, and that was Germany at that time. So I think the good thing that we see here in Europe is that we see the market to solar market also to depend on more and more pillars. And if we look into 2020, there will be very likely a fifth one. So everyone anticipates, or many people anticipate, that Poland will be also a gigawatt scale market in 2020. Next slide, please. So let's take a look a little bit deeper into the top 5. What we did, we also do that with the global market outlook. For the biggest markets, we invite our national association members or our partner associations to give us their view. That's not necessarily actually matching ours. We take that obviously into consideration, like many other informations. But if we have different views, we don't shy away to have that in our forecasts. What you can see here for Spain as the largest market, UNEF forecasted that the market would be 3.9 gigawatt, and this is in AC. Spain is, I believe, the only market in Europe that kind of has their official numbers being published in AC. So there are a couple of others worldwide, like the US, India, and Japan. But so you would have to translate that into DC, and there are different factors you can use. We use 1.2 gigawatt and 1.2, and then you end up at 4.7 gigawatt. Nevertheless, UNEF assumes basically pretty much stable growth. The 3.9 gigawatt is more or less what was awarded in the 2 tenders in 2 years ago, and these 3.9 gigawatt have to be installed by the end of the year. If that doesn't happen, you lose basically your award. And so that should be installed. We're not there yet if you look at the latest numbers from the regulators, but we are still pretty confident that this will happen. You also see that UNEF assumes that the market then will be stable at around 3 gigawatt AC per year. I think that's also not how it works in solar, especially that a lot of this will also depend on the PPA market, wholesale market, and obviously that will be different. But still, Spain has a target of 37 gigawatt, and that's basically how it is broken down, and that's why they did it. In any case, we are pretty optimistic. Like UNEF, we have a different pattern, but that's what we also so we think that the Spanish market will continue to grow also after the tender based systems have been installed. Next slide, please. Okay. So if you look at 2018, that was the year that the German market took back the #1 position in Europe, and although in 2019 they will probably have lost it, the market actually expanded quite a bit further. So while around 3 gigawatt was installed in 2018, and that was the first time Germany actually met his 2.5 gigawatt annual target for years. In 2019, the market grew by another gigawatt to around 4 gigawatt. I think it's still some way to go. We're at 3.4 now, but if basically the same amount was installed in October, in November and December, we will be actually be there. And we think that the market will also continue to grow and go beyond that, actually also beyond 5, and at some point also beyond 6 gigawatt. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, we have the tenders, which are just a small part of the installations, obviously. But since the German government, or Germany as the country, is missing its 2020 targets and is speeding up to 2030 and try to get even more ambitious there, the government has recently announced extra tenders, and the first capacities were tendered in, or are being tendered in 2019. That was 1 gigawatt. In 2020, we will have 1.4. In 2021, we will have 1.6. So I think that's considerable amounts. And if you look at the current momentum, policy-wise, Fridays for Future, especially in Germany, people really are going for solar. I just have a friend who wanted to install a solar system, and he has to wait actually 3 months before the installer can do it. So there's really a good momentum going on, and so that's why we believe it will continue. There's obviously a little challenge in Germany also, like in many other markets, and that's that the 52 gigawatt cumulative solar target is about to be met sometime next year. But the good thing was that as part of this climate change law, the government coalition has recently agreed to extend that target to 98 gigawatt. That is not yet put into law. That still has to happen. But we're pretty upbeat that this will take place. Next slide, please. Okay, so this headline was more or less from our colleagues from Holland Solar, and they called their booming market a Dutch solar miracle, and you can really term it that way because this market has been going through the roof the last few years. And so Holland last year has turned into a gigawatt scale market. So I think the level of gigawatt cumulatively was reached, and now they are also an annual gigawatt scale market, and with around 2.5 gigawatts being installed in 2019. And as you can see, so historically, let's see if that will continue that way, but Holland was always very strong in residential, and since solar has gotten so competitive, it started to win really almost like a landslide in the two SDE plus tenders, and so that means the commercial and ground mount part has been growing as well. The pipeline for solar is huge. That was one in SDE plus. SDE plus will continue, so we can assume that the solar pipeline will grow even bigger. But Holland is densely populated, and obviously there are challenges in terms of land space, and we'll see how that goes. Nevertheless, everyone is pretty upbeat, and so are we. Next slide, please. Okay, so France started basically slightly on a disappointing note into 2019. Here you can basically see two graphs. On the left is the connected PV capacities and a forecast estimate by the French association SER, and on the right you see the annual energy program targets from the government. So we anticipate that France was around 1.1 gigawatt in 2019. That of course would assume a strong fourth quarter, because not only the first quarter was around 200 megawatts, was very, very slow to Q2. Q2 was also not so great, although a bit more, and Q3 also a bit better. but there's still some way to go. So still we think there's a chance they can beat this 1 gigawatt level. If they don't do it this year, they might do it next year, because as you can see, the target France has, which in average is 40 gigawatt by 2028, and they are only at 9 gigawatt end of 2018, is quite some way to go. So if the market would continue like it did in the past, it would only or would remain under 20 gigawatts in total installed. But at least what we understand from the French government, they are committed. There are issues that need to be addressed. We highlight them and list them in the report. But they are working on that, and okay, it takes some delays, but also we are here optimistic that the French market will finally is on course to become a multi-gigawatt market in the next few years. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I think the surprising act in 2009 was Poland. So not only that it is obviously heavily a coal country, and the government is defending that power generation source, but after years of really negligible installation levels, so as of 2016, there you could see some movements, and the big driver were these so-called micro installations under 50 kilowatts, thanks to a very favorable self-consumption scheme. And since 2016, you also have auctions. The first auctions, I think that was in 2018, sorry, was pretty much disappointing. You had one in 2019, and you have another one now in coming up soon. And their solar didn't fare too well, but at least we're seeing also bigger systems being installed, also partly coming from self-consumption. But the main driver is simply under 50 kilowatt, because there are also no administrational hurdles, so it's very easy to grid connect the systems. And as you can see here, our colleagues from the Polish Association PV Polska are very upbeat that next year Poland will become a gigawatt market. And if you look at the installations and the recent announcements and the pipeline, that is very likely to happen. We agree with that. Next slide, please. So these were just a few details on the 5 largest markets. If you look at the EU as a whole, the EU 28, we see that, or we think that the market will continue to grow. So from 16.7 this year to nearly 27 gigawatt in 2023. There are a couple of reasons. I think one reason for the growth is until 2020. Okay, obviously it's cost. That's the base for everything. But beyond that, there's the 2020 targets, which I already mentioned. That's why we see somewhat larger growth also in the coming year. Then a little bit of a slowdown as sort of the countries settle to prepare for the next growth phase, and then it will continue to go up again in the 2 digits to reach this almost 27 gigawatt in 2023. Next slide. In yeah, in 2023, as you can see, we believe that the European market will be 10 gigawatt larger than today, and we expect, although Spain is now the biggest market, let's see how it, and the pipeline is now over 100 gigawatt for PPA wholesale market based systems. But grid connections are really a severe issue, and so let's really see what will happen. So we think that Germany will be bigger as a market than Spain in 2023. So next slide, please. Okay, so we always come up with the sort of weather forecast for the top 15 markets. We also do that in the global market outlook. And in this case, our weather forecast for the EU remains really bright and sunny, with just very few clouds on the horizons. When looking really at this top 15, we are very upbeat on 13 of these countries. And it's just 2 countries where we think that the political support prospects can be considered cloudy, and that's Italy and the UK. So UK is still in this transition mode after the government has cut the programs, and they have also different things on their mind at the moment. But here there's little visibility how that will turn out, and with Italy, there were a few auctions now announced, and there are things happening. But my colleague was recently 2 days ago at a meeting of the Italian Industry Association, and if you hear the discussions there and issues with capacity markets, gas, and how this is being protected, so it's not so, it doesn't look so easy for solar to grow as much as it actually should, taking into consideration the high electricity prices and the sunny climate, and also on top the vast space that Italy actually offers in comparison to other countries. That's why we consider the UK and Italy rather with mixed feelings when it comes to solar. Next slide, please. If we look at the EU's cumulative PV markets from 2020 to 23, we see really constant growth in the low two-digit annual growth rates, with the medium scenario forecasting basically, that's the gray line, nearly 100 gigawatt capacity more online than today, which would result in a total installed capacity of around 226 gigawatt in 2023. And while the high scenario is much higher at 277, the low scenario is at 180. So in fact, so we consider actually the business case to be really strong in any case over the next 4 years. So even in our low scenario, 180 gigawatt is doesn't sound impressive when you look at what has been just installed, but if you go 1 or 2 years back, actually it would mean that that Europe still installed over 50 gigawatts from 2019, and again, in comparison to what we've seen in the years before, that would that's still something, although we don't believe with all the legislation and all the developments that we're seeing that this is likely to happen. So we're rather going with our mid scenario and are rather optimistic that it could be even better. Next slide, please. Okay, so what I would like to do in the next few slides, I would like to give you some background why we think that that there is this this EU solar boom, this new solar renaissance. And here we've taken a slide from the recent IEA renewables outlook that was published, and I think this illustrates very nicely where the advantage of Europe is. This is Germany, but there are many other countries with similar high residential electricity prices, which you can see in red. And if you compare that to the solar LCOEs in 2018, Germany shows here the widest gap with many other countries. Australia, where residential solar also thrives, also has a nice gap, but in other countries that's not so much the case. And this is for sure one big driver for the residential segment. But if we go also, next slide, please. To the C&I and utility segment, we see that the low solar LCOEs are also increasingly beating even wholesale power prices. On this slide, again, also taking from IEA, for Spain, you could really nicely see that that utility PV is even cheaper in Spain, and that explains obviously also the huge pipeline of subsidy-free solar systems. It is cheaper than wholesale prices, and even you can simply see that commercial scale PV systems are beating industrial retail prices. So the business case, that's for Spain, but we can also see that somewhere else. Next slide, please. So this is a slide taken from the European Technology and Innovation Platform for Photovoltaics, ETIP PV. And so here you can simply see that this is not only true, what I've shown before, for the southern part, but also for northern countries in the EU. So on the left, so you can simply see that today solar power can be generated at the LCOEs of 5 cents, even in a northern European city like Helsinki, and these are forecast until 2050, and this continues every year with costs anticipated to go down further, down to 2 cents in 2050. And if you go to the right, you are again in Spain, and we're at 3 cents today, and will be at 1 cent in 2050. And we've compared that slide actually with current wholesale prices in the respective countries, which you can see in red, and with current industrial electricity prices. So the good thing is, and I think here it's also nicely shown in this graphs, that there are different interest rates shown. So under different WACC conditions, you can see that even if the WACC is very high, actually solar is still competitive, and that's actually good news, because in the past that was always an issue, that that solar had this high capex, and that was really one barrier. But here, according to this slide, it shows that even in higher interest rate environments, solar is competitive, both in wholesale and industrial electricity price levels. Next slide, please. Okay, but so again, cost is the base for solar being the driver. The other drivers are coming from the policy level. I mentioned that first. This is a slide from Eurostat. It's the most recent one you can get because it's for 2017, but still it hasn't so much changed. You still can see that many countries have not yet achieved their RES targets, and that means they have to do something if they want to do it. We've already seen the tenders in Spain that were clearly implemented just because of that. For example, in Hungary, the one reason it's booming, Hungary actually theoretically has met it, but they haven't, or actually their renewables share is going down because a lot is coming from biomass, and due to some issues there, they have an interesting development that the renewables share is going down, and they are also going now strongly for solar because solar is simply the most versatile, easy and quick to install, and even often lowest cost means of expanding the share of renewables. And that's why we see a lot of governments now embracing solar. On top comes that solar, unlike other sources, unfortunately, are very popular still among European citizens. And yeah, this attractiveness is and will further translate into more installations. Next slide, please. That was short term. Midterm, until 2030, we have the clean energy package that was finally passed. There were several directives, but the last was passed middle of this year and May this year. And there are several provisions that are many provisions actually that support solar. I think one of the important ones is that at least 32% of renewables in the EU energy consumption by 2030 have to come from renewables. And if you translate that into solar, solar is at the moment barely at 5% EU-wide. If you translate that into solar, and especially with this attractive costs, then the share of solar should go up to 20%. So that means from 130 where we're now to 640 gigawatts. We think so that would be needed. We think that's doable because costs will continue to go down. But there's one thing that we and that's really a challenge. While Brussels has really shown this clear ambition and yeah, passed that actually into laws, this has to now be transformed and put into action in the member states. There we're seeing that more ambition is needed, and that's why SolarPower Europe and its national members are working on this. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then if we look long term, yesterday you probably already have heard about that and read about the details. So Ursula von der Leyen has, as a new Commission President, has proposed the European Green Deal. Goal is to become world's first carbon neutral continent by 2050. And what's interesting is that on top, she also wants to increase 2030 greenhouse gas emission target from 40 to at least 50 and up to 55%. And in this whole, because of course that's pretty ambitious what she wants to do, there will be many sub packages that need to support that, and this touches industrial strategy, it's about financing, it's about sectoral integration, gas decarbonization, it's about building renovations, with buildings being really a major block of CO2 emissions. It's about sustainability, smart mobility, and obviously it's also about state aid revision, because state aid will be needed for to really stem this big effort. Next slide, please. So what we've done in the report, I don't want to go into details here, but we've really looked at several trends, because we think there are certain topics that really need to be addressed to make solar grow and able to tap its huge potential and satisfy the needs actually for all these legislative packages. And these are basically all topics where we have task forces work streams they are working on, and in the report we have outlined that in detail. So I just want to show you just two examples. Next slide, please. One is industrial strategy, which we think is urgently needed for solar on the brink of this new renaissance in the EU. The EU and a couple of countries have identified batteries, storage, mostly supported by the car industry, as a target for industrial strategy. Solar has not been seen as crucial so far. We are working on that. That's changing. There are a couple of challenges, so it's not there at the moment. We just have the single-sided focus on deploying renewables. There are other countries, in particular in Asia, where that's different. There, the view on growing the solar sector is much more comprehensive. So it's not only deploying, it's also having an industry, also an export industry. And that's what Europe should also work on, and it's also important in order to keep and further advance solar technology. So at the moment, we still have, if we look at the opportunities, a pretty unique R&D ecosystem. We would not want to keep that. Actually, we would also like to grow that in the long run. It's also a real chance, actually, because there is still manufacturers left in Europe to within this new renaissance, actually, and a backing from governments, European manufacturers can really establish along the complete value chain. And we have to see, especially in today's world, which is unfortunately somewhat dividing, we have to also look at that into regarding security of supply, and it also offers the opportunity to brand European solar industry as a sustainability leader. So this is one topic which we think is important. Next topic. I've just picked randomly one, and this is, for example, digital solar. Again, so we see here the EU is simply lacking a comprehensive rollout strategy for digital infrastructure. So you can see that, especially when you look at network operators, grids are really important for solar. Its current incentives are often on capex, and they really do not incentivize the use of flexibility solutions, which we as solar would really need, or renewables as a whole. There are issues with data access, management, interoperability of standards, and the standards really remain to define. That's also an issue. And we really have to start from scratch, because many policymakers simply need to be kept up with all these advances of digitalization. They are not up to date. So it's really about education. The opportunities, on the other hand, are huge. It extends our solar capabilities to really use flexibility, new business models, really serve the prosumers so that we can use peer-to-peer and really unlock all these flexibility solutions. And in the end, we have many companies in Europe that are digital leaders in their field. What's needed is actually to really make them also and support basically Europe's industrial leadership when it comes to digitalization and energy. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so just one slide, what I just wanted to show is actually where we see also opportunities for Europe with the new growth. In particular, this is where European companies are strong and where there are also possibilities, and it's not just about the least cost mass-produced product. So it's about solar skins, intelligent skins. We really have to address the building sector, which is responsible for around 1/3 of CO2 emissions. We really, floating solar addresses one issue of lacking space. There are incredible amounts of lakes that could be used, or other water surfaces to deploy solar. Recently, the first floating solar plant was in France, largest in Europe. That was just very recently. There were also a couple of products like pilot products regarding agri-photovoltaics. So because what we're seeing now is also that there's a return of really big systems in Germany so far. For example, utility scale systems were limited to 10 megawatt through the tenders, but now we are having much bigger systems. One, for example, is a 180 megawatt system, a free subsidy system that's currently being built. And so I think these are then also intelligent solutions to address bigger power plants, so that space can be used by different stakeholders. Next slide, please. Yeah, and obviously it's not about power, because when we want to go carbon neutral by 2050, it's also about the other sectors, transport and heat, and that's why we are also addressing mobility, and we have several also car companies, storage companies as our members, and we're working with them to address these issues. That mobility obviously is a big chance for solar. Many people who go for an electric car really say, we really want it because we are able to use solar power to fuel our car. With all this corporate sourcing now taking place, and the corporates getting really excited and very active in renewables, there's a huge potential for the C&I self-consumption sector. And again, so buildings are absolutely underutilized asset when it comes to solar today. I think it's much less than 10% that of buildings that have solar on their roofs, and that doesn't take into account facades. So that means the potential is huge. There was a recent study from JRC ISPRA, from the European Commission, which estimated that there's a solar rooftop potential for over 680 terawatt hours per year generation. And again, also here, there's a lot of value added for equipment manufacturers, inverters, BOS, a lot of potential jobs that can be created in Europe. Next slide, please. And that's how I would like to end this presentation and offer a few minutes for questions. We see really big opportunities, especially in Europe. The Commission is backing renewables, and we will see also more backing for solar. Nevertheless, the task is really gigantic, and solar starts on a low level. We're ready as a technology, we're cost-wise there, but we need the right policy framework, the right boundary conditions, and particularly on the member state level, a lot still has to be done. So you're welcome to join and work with us. And if you want to download the report, please, you can do that on our website. And if you have any questions beyond what was being asked now during this last hour, which I might not be able to answer, please contact me via my email, and I will try to answer it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think it's been a really comprehensive and exhaustive presentation, touching upon many different topics. So the largest markets, the European market as a whole, a number of solar trends that are taking place. So due to lack of time, of course, we haven't been able to discuss in detail each of these trends, but in this case, if you want to know more, I invite you to have a closer look at the report, which is, as just said, available for free download at our website. Since we have 5-10 more minutes, maybe we can address some of the questions from the audience. And I would like to start with one, since you mentioned the largest market, Spain. And you also mentioned that the numbers for 2019 are an extrapolation of the first 3 quarters. Would you like to say a bit more about what is actually being installed in 2019 and whether we will actually reach the number that has been forecasted for the current year?
Okay, yeah. When you look, I think, at the latest numbers that are available from Spain's TSO, I think only 1.8 gigawatt AC had been installed by end of October. So that's depending on what factor you use, 2.2, 2.3 gigawatt DC. So that's quite some way to go to the over 4 gigawatt. But first of all, I think it's possible. We've seen that already, I think, in Germany in 2010, 11 or so, when within a month, and that's almost 10 years ago, way over a gigawatt was installed. So especially with, and that were much smaller systems at that time. So that means with these bigger systems, it is possible to install 2 gigawatts very easily in 2 months. So I think, first of all, so that means time-wise it is possible. Second, we believe that really the companies will strive to meet that deadline again. So they have until the end of this year if they want to really benefit from their tender award. Of course, the bids they did were very competitive, but still they were mostly higher than what you can get on the open market. So for that reason, we're still optimistic that the market will be above 4 gigawatt. So, but let's see.
Thanks. I guess we'll have more information for the GMO 2020. I'm clustering a few questions that come up in relation to auctions, because this is something that we haven't really addressed during the presentation. So can you tell us a bit about prices and trends across the EU? And if I may integrate with another question, do we need different type of auctions rather than the ones that we see today?
Okay, so I think auctions are still I think it's one of many tools. It's good to have, because first of all, they've in particular in the past shown to the industry and also to policymakers. So they brought a lot of transparency about pricing and really have proven how competitive solar is. So I think they served an important purpose. There were obviously issues with tenders if they were not designed carefully. So we've seen that, for example, in France, where markets have not been growing so quickly, that, for example, the tenders go down to the 100 kilowatt level, which really doesn't make sense if you look at all the efforts and then and the costs and then what you can get for that. And often, as I said, the volumes were not big enough. But I think they serve the purpose and still do that, because especially if the government simply says we do these tenders over a certain period of time and it's certain amounts, that's something the industry as a whole can count on. So they actually know that these amounts will be tendered, and they should be also, if the tender is designed correctly, be able to be grid connected then within the given time frames. So on top, I think tenders can also need further development. The German government had tried to do that with their innovation tender, which was supposed to happen in September but did not. And here, I think another element, an intelligent element that could be and should be also added to tendered, is that about flexibility, because it's really about services, ancillary services, so something solar and storage can add, but often at the moment cannot, because the framework conditions are not there yet. And that's how actually tenders can be further developed.
Yes, I think it's interesting that you mentioned intelligent tenders. Actually, I want to connect it to a question from an attendee that asks, do you think that, what do you think can be done at EU level to improve access to grid infrastructure? Are intelligent tenders, as you just described, one of the solutions?
Yeah, and in the end, it's really about as we said. Also, I think the incentives have to be structured differently to incentivize investments also in grids, because especially in Spain, as we can see that the grids cannot manage these 100 gigawatts so easily, also and especially the grid connection points. So but again, so I think it's all about regulations in the end, and so there are discussions in Brussels, but on national levels with the TSO associations and the DSO associations and all the market players actually to work on that, because yeah, it of course brings some challenges and changes completely the systems, and some players also feel uncomfortable with that. So in the end, it's a policy game, and that has to be fought through.
Since you mentioned storage before, there's a few questions about storage, so maybe I can group them into a general question. So can you say a few words about storage trends in the EU and where it stands in relation to solar deployment, and particularly in relation to decentralized distributed generation and storage?
Yeah, especially if we look at decentralized storage, we're currently working on our first storage report, which we will publish in the spring, early spring, at our summit, end of March, and here we see we're currently doing our research, our homework. We see that across several markets, also storage is growing. But the pattern is actually similar, that in most markets, or in those markets actually that have a strong solar market, have also a rather strong small-scale storage market. It is not one-on-one like this, because in Holland, Holland is different differs from that, simply because the driver there is net metering, and net metering doesn't favor storage. But in general, wherever you have self-consumption, you see storage coming, and we are upbeat that with the decentralized solar market, the storage market also goes up. Because in Germany, you can clearly see that basically almost every self-consumption small system, at least there's an inquiry for a storage system, and every second at least is being installed with the solar system, with the storage system. So I think it's going in the right direction, and we will see that also in other markets than Germany, or Italy, for example.
All right, thank you. I see that it's already 4 minutes past 3, so since we're stretching a bit over the original schedule, I see that there are a few questions that have been unanswered, but I would invite you to get back to us, so hopefully we'll be able to address your answers. But just to conclude perhaps this discussion, one general overarching question that emerges: do you think that we have to worry about the EU solar market anymore, considering the growth rate that we see?
I know, as I mentioned, I think we're really just entering first a new solar decade for the next 10 years. And also beyond that, solar is the lowest cost option in many places today, and it has the steepest cost reduction curve compared to any other technology. So its competitiveness will only improve. It is so flexible, so versatile. You can use it for almost anything, and that's why, and in particular with storage, its flexibility and versatility gets even bigger. I think solar will continue, but obviously it is sort of a revolution and changing really the new energy world, or the energy world into a new energy world. And that's why we have some barriers, and quite some barriers, that still need to be overcome. And we're working on that. Still, we're optimistic.
Well, Michael, I think we came to an end, so I would like to thank you very much for your presentation, and also thank all the attendees for being with us and stretching a bit over. As said, you will receive the slides and the recording of the webinar shortly after the end of this session. So please keep an eye on our upcoming events and webinars. We have many planned in the next year. Michael already mentioned the SolarPower Summit at the end of March. Registration are open, so please have a look and register if you're interested. And with this, I would like to say goodbye to everyone of you, and wish you a pleasant rest of the day. I hope you appreciate the webinar, and talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye bye.